Hello, I'm Jillian. Thank you for joining me. When you see PBL, you probably think of project-based learning. But this acronym is also used for a pedagogy called problem-based learning, which emerged in the late 1960s at McMaster University Medical School in Hamilton, Canada. Both PBLs are learning-centered, student-directed, inquiry-based, experiential, and collaborative, and both involve small groups of students working to address a problem. But the goal and outcome of project-based learning is the creation of a product or artifact. Now, although one might also be produced in a problem-based activity as all or part of a resolution to the problem, it's not a requirement. More often, problem-based learning is conceptual and theoretical in nature. It's also less concerned with finding correct solutions to problems and more focused on what can be learned and understood by tackling the problem. There are several widely available resources that present rationale for using problem-based learning, so I won't focus on their claims here. Instead, my intention is to outline how problem-based learning activities are enacted, offline and online. School closures during the pandemic have caused the migration of teaching and learning to online platforms. It seems likely that even when schools reopen fully, a blended approach to schooling will continue, and pedagogies that are suitable for both offline and online environments will be invaluable. Problem-based learning is one such pedagogy. The process that I'm going to outline is fairly generic and can be easily modified to suit different learning contexts. But it was developed for higher education, so modifications with younger students, particularly regarding supervision, scheduling, and expectations, will be necessary. Let's begin with setting up groups. In my experience, the optimal group size for a PBL activity in higher education is 6 to 8 students. Fewer than 6 risks placing too much workload burden on each student, and more than 8 risks having some students without a defined role or much to contribute. Because students are encouraged to bring prior knowledge and experiences to bear in addressing the problem, groups comprised of students with varying backgrounds make collaboration more comprehensive, interesting, and engaging. A tip: since groups take time to develop, form, storm, norm, and perform, as Bruce Tuckman says, I keep the same groups intact for the entire set of problems. Higher education students are expected to manage their group dynamic with integrity and maturity. The PBL process is driven by the problems. Problems are the curriculum organizers and how curricular themes are introduced, investigated, and learned. Therefore, the problems have to be carefully crafted with specific qualities. Firstly, problems should be complex enough to warrant a group effort. In other words, every group member should be engaged in meaningful exploration of relevant themes. Secondly, problems should be ill-structured, flawed, open-ended, and intentionally vague. This can seem strange and counterintuitive for many educators who might be more familiar with case studies that are well-drawn, comprehensive, detailed, contextualized, and anecdotal. Case studies are typically meant to be directly instructive, but problems become instructive as they're unpackaged, researched, and resolved. But don't be fooled into thinking that problems are easier to construct. There is a tricky balance to strike. On the one hand, if they are too vague, students might pursue themes that are tangential to the curriculum. And on the other hand, if problems are too specific, they might elicit an immediate response or promote an obvious singular solution, which you don't want. This will all become clearer when I review the steps. Finally, problems should be authentic, relevant, consequential, meaningful, plausible, and credible. And they should resonate with students' experiences and interests as much as possible. Student buy-in and engagement are essential for motivating their best efforts, both as a group and as individuals contributing to that group. A tip: I prepare the first few problems of a problem set, and all groups work on the same problems at the same time, while the students are becoming familiar with the process and the expectations. This also helps ensure that as a class, we are exhausting the themes and possible solutions for each problem. As the course or unit progresses, the groups can develop problems on their own, either for their group or for other groups. And this can help to expand the topics and themes to which the class is exposed and cover more curricular ground. Here are a few problem examples. I used this problem with graduate students in a research methodology course. You are the ethics review board for your institution. You have just received this research proposal. The researcher is expecting a full report of your judgment, including rationale and recommendations. So I provide a proposal that is inadequate in ways that would require the students to know the federal and local research ethics guidelines and standards. You can create these types of proposals by just deleting or altering aspects of existing proposals. And you can provide each group with a different proposal, which would enrich step 4, as you will soon see. For K-12 problem examples, it should be noted that I am not a teacher of children and therefore have not used these problems, but I offer them as ideas that can be further developed. If acted upon, some of these may also qualify as project-based learning. So for grades 1 to 3, your teacher would like to celebrate birthdays in class. What plan can you make to celebrate everyone's birthday in a way that is appropriate for school, sensitive, respectful, and inclusive? So for this problem, the students would need to decide what the words appropriate, sensitive, respectful, and inclusive mean in the context of classroom and school life. And they would also have to learn a bit about each other, not simply their dates of birth. 2 problems for grades 4 to 6. Your class will create and maintain a vegetable garden on school property for the school community to use. Before giving the go-ahead, the principal wants a proposal which includes the type of plants, materials, a budget, a schedule, and how the garden will be maintained and utilized. The requirements for this are listed in the problem itself, but you can remove them so the students must determine what comprises a proposal. The students will also need to understand the environmental conditions of their school property, the growth potential of different plants, and the stakeholders. A second problem. A new student has joined your class from a rural region in Thailand. You have been asked by the teacher to respectfully and sensitively help her integrate over the next few months into class, the school, and Western culture. The students will need, for this problem, to understand the child's background and experiences, to find ways for bridging the cultural and linguistic divides, and they'll also need to determine what respectfully and sensitively means. And they will need to develop strategies and a plan of action. For grades 7 and 8, your friend tells you that she is having a lot of tummy aches. She's scared and doesn't want to tell an adult just yet, but would like some help figuring out why. The students will need to investigate causes of adolescent abdominal pain, both physical and psychological. They'll need to also explore the moral obligations they have regarding keeping this a secret from adults. And for high school, you have been randomly selected by your school board to develop a plan for programming Queer Awareness Week, which will run at every high school in the district. So students for this problem may survey what is already in place regarding LGBTQ++ education in curricular and extracurricular programs, relevant policies at the board and school level, official federal and provincial or state positions, school demographics regarding cultural, ethnic, and religious representation, and relevant student groups and clubs. They may also consult members of the queer communities regarding what is appropriate and what is needed. So now that you see what the problems are like, how do the students work with them? Well, there are 5 steps. Unpack the problem and plan, investigate, share and resolve, report, and debrief. And I'll go through each one of those. In the traditional approach, these steps are enacted face-to-face. With video conferencing and document sharing technology, however, they can be quite readily done online. Unpack the problem and plan. The group reads the problem together and starts to unpack its components in an open and inclusive brainstorming process that's guided by the following questions. What information are we given? So what do we know? What information is missing? What don't we know? What is the problem that we need to address and or resolve? What do we need to find out in order to fully understand the problem and move forward? Who are we in the scenario? What stakeholder role or roles might we play? And do any of us have any relevant experience or knowledge? You will notice that none of these questions ask for recommendations or resolutions. That isn't of concern at this point. And if the problem has been well crafted, recommendations and resolutions will not be forthcoming. Instead, a range of perspectives and ideas should be expressed and recorded. And from these, objectives are determined, prioritized, and divided among group members. Everyone is given a task to complete, which usually involves research regarding the question, what do we need to find out in order to fully understand the problem and move forward? Timelines are also determined for when the group will reconvene. My course outline provides only the date for the full class presentation, which is step 4, and that's usually 2 to 3 weeks later. The group has to determine its own schedule for steps 2 to 3. Of course, for younger students, a schedule can be provided. A tip: most students underestimate how much time steps 2 to 3 will take, and they benefit from a heads up and a little prompting for the first couple of problems anyway. This step for the first couple of problems may take more than an hour, but by the third problem, the group can often complete it in 30 minutes. Step 2 is investigation. This is generally an independent activity, although younger students may wish to work in pairs. Each student is responsible to the group for investigating a topic area as determined in step 1. Depending on the problem and the age of the students, this can involve, for example, studying online or hard copy resources, surveying or interviewing stakeholders, seeking information from experts, and/or observing a particular phenomenon. An informal but comprehensive report is prepared from this investigation, which is shared and discussed with the group in step 3. These reports are also graded, and I'll talk about grading shortly. This step can usually be completed within a week. A tip: I have students maintain an online portfolio of their individual reports. It's interesting and often insightful to see the range, or lack of, in the topics each student investigates across the problems. Patterns can emerge that illuminate their particular areas of interest and their growing areas of expertise. The group reconvenes at their designated time. Students share their investigation reports with the group, essentially teaching their peers what they have learned. They may also choose to circulate their report. The group then discusses how this new knowledge informs the problem or fails to, as is sometimes the case despite best efforts. It's not unusual to have misdirects or to generate more questions than answers at this point. Once all the reports have been discussed, the group revisits the questions in step 1, but with more knowledge and insight. The problem might now be ready to address, or the group may need to identify new objectives and assign new tasks for another round of investigation and sharing, so a repeat of steps 2 and 3. The timelines become pretty tight when further investigation is required, but this is an important part of the process and it should be accommodated. A tip: because step 3 is collaborative, analytical, and the heart of the learning process, it can take up to 2 hours and it should not be rushed. Eventually, the group will have exhausted its inquiry or time. A final report is prepared by the group that fully addresses the problem, makes recommendations and/or outlines solutions, and provides supporting and properly cited evidence from their research. These reports are presented to the entire class, followed by an opportunity for questions from classmates. I assign a group grade for the report and presentation. Again, I'll describe that shortly. A tip: I let the group determine the nature of its presentation regarding who presents, if they use visual aids or handouts, whether it's a live presentation or pre-recorded, and any other variables. All group members, though, are expected to participate in some capacity. Another tip: When all groups present on the same problem, it's interesting to discuss the similarities and differences in their ideas, recommendations, and solutions, why this might have occurred, and what it implies about addressing problems and problem solving more generally. In this final step, the group collectively reflects on the efficacy of their process, how they each did with their individual tasks, and what they might need to change for the next problem. This is also an opportunity to celebrate the completion of the problem. So some groups choose to meet in a coffee shop or a pub, making it more of a social and relaxed situation. After the debriefing session and based on the discussion, students evaluate themselves and their peers. I'll explain shortly. A tip. I sometimes ask students to journal about their personal experience or write a reflection piece for their portfolio based on one or two of the problems. This reinforces the importance of the process and their disposition and conduct while working with others. So you might be wondering by now what I'm doing this whole time as the course instructor. Well, after crafting the problems, and if I've done a good job at that, I play a supportive role as a facilitator, coach, mentor, resource, and guide. I join each group for step 1 of the first 2 problems to ensure that they're off to a good start. And I join each group for step 3 of every problem to observe individual students and the group dynamic. I'm particularly on the lookout for students who are struggling with or underperforming in this format so that I can provide individual support. I may also participate by prompting and guiding the discussion if required. And I attend step 5 by invitation only, or if I have a significant concern regarding the group dynamic. My presence otherwise would undermine the independence of the group and their ability and motivation to resolve any problems they might be having. Teachers of younger students will likely need to assume a much more active and directive role in all of the steps. And then, of course, I'm responsible for assessment. To be consistent with what and how the students are learning, my assessments are built into 3 of the PBL processes, as you saw. Each problem is graded out of 60 marks. 25 marks are allotted for the individual report in step 2. My focus is on the comprehensiveness of the investigation and the clarity with which the information is portrayed, given its purpose is to inform the problem. I also consider additions, deletions, and modifications that are made to these reports as the group cycles between steps 2 and 3. Although these may result from a lack of thoroughness and effort initially, they also demonstrate continued engagement in the collaborative process, and this should be validated. The group report and presentation in step 4 is weighted the same, also with 25 marks. My focus is on cohesion between the problem, the solutions or recommendations, and the supporting evidence, on the comprehensiveness of the report and presentation, and on evidence of collaboration and inclusiveness among group members. The final 10 marks are allotted for peer and self-evaluation following the debriefing in step 5. This mark is focused on effort, engagement, and contribution. It reinforces to students that they are accountable to their group for the work that they do and that the success of the group depends on each one of them. It's also another means of identifying students who are struggling with this format. Following the debriefing session, each student sends me a number between 5 and 10 for each group member as well as for themselves, with a single statement of justification. So for example, they might say, so-and-so gets a 6 because they were very late for session 3 with no explanation. Or so-and-so gets a 9 because they took the lead and they moved us along. Or I get a 7 because I missed a key point in research. And then I just average these numbers for each student to generate a mark out of 10 that cannot be lower than 5. Here's what my scorecard looks like. This is an important tip that speaks to the moral and ethical dimensions of teaching, which some of my other videos focus on. When a student appears to be struggling, either as observed by me during sessions, as noted in the quality of their reports, or as identified by peer evaluations, I will meet with them privately and as quickly as possible to develop a plan of support. I'm particularly sensitive regarding their privacy and dignity, which may be compromised in a group forum. In the spirit of full disclosure, and at the risk of undermining my position regarding PBL, I would like to note 4 challenges that keep me up at night. Some students struggle with group work, particularly those on either extreme of both academic ability and social emotional maturity. Grading involves a high level of subjectivity. Fairness is a constant consideration. PBL is time-consuming, with a single problem taking 2 to 3 weeks. And finally, there's no direct teaching, so you have to have faith that the students are learning the curricular content. But these challenges, particularly if well managed, are far outweighed by the following benefits. PBL helps students build life skills in researching, collaborating, critical thinking, communicating, verbal, written, and social, problem solving, organizing, reasoning, and perspective taking. PBL promotes character values of responsibility, cooperation, dependability, trust, trustworthiness, accountability, respect, and fairness. PBL works very well online. And finally, PBL is fun for students and for the instructor. I'll leave you with this graphic summary of the steps. And if you have any experiences or thoughts on problem-based learning, please share so that we can continue to develop this pedagogy as we reimagine schooling post-pandemic.